They called it Black Ridge Valley, though no official map ever carried that name. Soldiers gave it the nickname after too many patrols ended with casualties, after too many teams got pinned down by enemy fighters who moved through the mountains like ghosts. The valley was long, narrow, and deceptive, open at the center, but surrounded by ridgelines so steep they looked almost vertical. Anyone who walked into it could feel it, the sense of being watched, weighed, measured. On that late afternoon, the sky hung low with dust blown in from the east. The wind carried the distant thump of mortar fire from a nearby village, but nothing prepared the SEALs for what waited inside the valley. 380, 1 Navy SEALs, 7 teams temporarily combined for a coordinated mountain sweep, entered the valley on foot, moving in staggered columns. Their mission was supposed to be routine: search and clear a suspected weapons corridor, confirm enemy movement, then exfil at sunset. The planning was flawless, the intelligence looked solid, and the terrain, though harsh, seemed manageable, until it wasn't. The moment the last team crossed the natural choke point, a narrow rock passage barely wide enough for 2 men side by side, the mountains erupted. It started with the unmistakable crack of a rifle shot from the west ridge, then another, then a dozen more. Within seconds, the echoes of gunfire bounced from cliff to cliff, turning the valley into a massive speaker chamber amplifying every round. The SEALs immediately broke formation, diving behind rocks, scanning ridgelines, calling out contact reports. But the enemy had planned this ambush with precision. From the north ridge, mortar tubes started thumping, sending shells arcing into the open center of the valley. Dirt and rock blasted into the air, dust rolling like angry waves. From the east ridge, RPG teams launched volleys that streaked across the sky like fiery spears. Snipers, machine gunners, and spotters were positioned with mathematical perfection. The valley had become a kill box. Senior Chief Rourke, the most seasoned SEAL in the group, had seen plenty of bad situations in his career, but nothing like this. "They've been waiting for us," he muttered, sliding behind a boulder while shouting orders to disperse and seek higher cover. But higher cover was impossible. Every ridge was already controlled by the enemy. They were trapped in the worst position a soldier could be in: low ground with no cover. Radio chatter exploded. Alpha team pinned on the south wall. Bravo taking heavy casualties. We need air support. Ridge fighters are moving closer. They're flanking. Rourke grabbed his comms handset. "Command, this is Rourke. We are ambushed. Repeat, massive ambush. Forces closing in from all ridges. We need immediate CS. How copy?" The reply came with a delay that felt like a lifetime. "Rourke, we hear you, but the nearest support is 30 minutes out." 30 minutes? In a valley like this, 30 minutes might as well be forever. The SEALs continued exchanging fire, every man firing controlled, disciplined bursts. These were elite fighters, trained for chaos, trained to make order out of hell. But even the best warriors in the world can run out of ammunition. 5 minutes into the ambush, magazines were already being conserved. 10 minutes in, grenades were becoming scarce. The enemy kept advancing, firing from angles that even experienced SEAL snipers struggled to counter. Rourke ducked as a spray of machine gun fire shredded the rock above him. "We're losing ground," someone yelled, but ground wasn't the problem. They were losing time. Command back at base stared at monitors and maps, listening to the frantic radio reports. They knew the truth before anyone said it aloud. The SEALs had no strategic exit, not with that level of enemy control, not in that terrain. Someone whispered what others were already thinking: "We may need to prepare the loss report." No one wanted to say it, but everybody knew. If immediate air support didn't arrive, and arrive low and aggressive, the entire force would be overrun. Dust choked the air, smoke drifted across the valley floor, the sun dipped lower, turning the battlefield red, gold, as if the valley itself was swallowing the light. And somewhere high above the mountains, a single A-10 Warthog pilot heard the distress call and refused to accept the inevitable. But that part of the story, her part, was still minutes away, for now the SEALs were alone, trapped, and fighting a battle the world would never hear about. Unless someone came, Captain Delaney Thomas sat strapped into the cockpit of her A-10 Thunderbolt Roman II, call sign Falcon 2, running through the last checks before returning to base. It had been a long 15-hour day, low, Sarah patrol escort duty, 2 minor engagements, and she was minutes from turning the aircraft toward home. Her fuel was good, her weapons mostly expended, and command had already cleared her for RTB. Then the emergency frequency lit up, static at first, then a voice, strained, breathless, nearly drowned out by gunfire. "This is Senior Chief Rourke, multiple teams pinned, 380, 1 personnel ambushed, Black Ridge Valley, enemy on all ridges. We are getting crushed. We need CS now." Delaney froze. 381. The number echoed inside her head like a physical vibration. She had heard of large unit ambushes, but never one this bad, never one involving this many SEALs. The urgency in Rourke's voice cut through every layer of her training. She could practically hear the chaos behind him. Ricochets, explosions, men shouting. Her pulse quickened. She toggled frequencies. "Falcon 2 to command. I'm hearing emergency calls from Black Ridge Valley. Confirm." Command came back sharply, almost rushed. "Falcon 2, stand by. That's not your AO. You are clear to return to base." She stared at her fuel readings. She had enough for a single short engagement, enough for 1 pass, maybe 2, not enough for a full clearance operation, but enough to make a difference. She keyed the mic again. "Command, what's the ETA on their support?" 30 minutes. The controller replied. Even he sounded uneasy. 30 minutes, in a valley ambush that severe. 30 minutes was a death sentence. Delaney's jaw tightened. She knew the terrain. Black Ridge was narrow, steep, and unforgiving, a nightmare for ground troops. And even worse for aircraft. The ridges formed almost a bowl, forcing any pilot to fly dangerously close to the walls. A-10 pilots were tough, but that valley, it could chew up a fighter jet like scrap metal. Command repeated, "Falcon 2, you are ordered to RTB. Do not engage, acknowledge." She should have acknowledged. She should have followed protocol, but something inside her refused. A memory flashed, her instructor's voice during training. Sometimes a pilot has to see the battlefield with their heart, not just their instruments. She switched to the emergency channel. "This is Falcon 2. Rourke, confirm your location." Rourke responded immediately, desperation bleeding through. Coordinates transmitted, enemy closing. Ammo low, multiple wounded. "We are getting overrun." Delaney inhaled slowly, her breath shook. She could leave. Follow orders, return safely, or she could go, not for glory, not for credit, but because 381 lives were about to disappear from the map, and she was the closest aircraft in the sky. She made her decision. "Black Ridge teams, Falcon 2 is inbound. Hold what you can." Command's voice erupted instantly. "Falcon 2, you are violating direct orders. Abort, abort." She clicked off the command channel, not because she ignored authority. She respected it deeply. But because she couldn't listen to people who weren't on the ground, bleeding in that valley. Delaney pushed the throttle forward. The A-10 roared. The sky blurred around her as she banked hard, turning the Warthog toward the coordinates. The engines thundered, shaking the cockpit. Her heart raced, but her hands were steady. Fighter pilot steady. She descended toward the mountains. As the first ridgeline rose before her, she saw smoke rising, thick, black, ominous. The sound of distant explosions thumped through the air. She muttered under her breath, "Hang on, boys." Her HUD lit up as she approached the valley edge. Warning, terrain proximity warning, hide. Density hostile zone warning, low altitude. She ignored all of it. What she saw through the canopy made her stomach clench. Seals pinned behind boulders, machine gun nests dug into the ridges, mortar teams firing relentlessly, sniper flashes glinting like tiny stars. It wasn't just an ambush, it was an extermination. Delaney flicked the master arm switch. The A-10 came alive in her hands. GA, U-8 rounds ready, Hydra rockets primed. She wasn't just disobeying orders now. She was rewriting the mission. "Falcon 2 to all ground units," she said, voice steady. "Mark your positions. I'm going in low." There was a pause. Then Rourke's voice broke through, raw with relief. "God bless you, Falcon 2. We'll hold." Delaney tightened her grip on the stick. She dove into the valley alone, breaking every rule, toward the jaws of death, holding 381 men hostage. And the moment her cannon spun up, the battle changed. The moment Captain Delaney Thomas crossed the lip of Black Ridge Valley, the battlefield changed, not for the enemy, not for command, but for the SEALs who had been counting their final rounds and preparing for what felt like the end. The roar of her A-10 engines cut through the valley like a battle cry. Every pinned-down operator looked up, disbelief on their dirt-smeared faces. "Falcon 2 is in the valley." Rourke shouted into the radio, and for the first time in 40 desperate minutes, hope surged through the ranks. To Delaney, the valley felt impossibly narrow. Jagged cliffs seemed to reach out like stone hands, ready to crush her aircraft. Warning tones filled the cockpit, but she shoved them aside. She didn't have room for fear. On the ridges, enemy fighters noticed her instantly. RPG teams scrambled, machine gunners swiveled, snipers repositioned. They all knew the same truth. An A-10 at low altitude could turn the tide of an entire war zone. Delaney angled her aircraft downward until the mountains practically scraped both wingtips. Her heart hammered. The GAU-8 cannon spun up, its iconic electric whir sending chills through even her seasoned body. Targets marked in red smoke. Rourke radioed, "Copy." She answered, voice cold and steady. Then she fired. The GAU-8's roar wasn't just sound. It was a physical force, a rolling thunder that shook the earth. Depleted uranium rounds screamed down in a brilliant golden stream, tearing across the ridge with terrifying precision. Enemy fighters diving for cover were shredded instantly. Machine gun nests evaporated. Mortar tubes flipped in explosions of dust and debris. The SEALs watched in awe from below. "Holy hell!" One whispered, "That's the angel of the valley." Another muttered, barely believing what he saw. Delaney pulled up sharply, engines screaming as she climbed just enough to avoid slamming into the northern ridge. Sweat streaked down the side of her helmet. She barely had room to breathe, literally and figuratively. More warning alarms. Missile lock, missile lock, missile lock. The enemy had brought manpads to the fight. A streak of white smoke cut through the sky behind her. "Falcon 2, you've got a missile on you," Rourke yelled. Delaney yanked the stick. The Warthog groaned in protest as she rolled, dropping countermeasure flares that burned bright against the dusk. The missile curved, chasing, then lost the heat signature and spiraled into a rock wall, exploding in a deafening blast. She didn't have time to celebrate. She dropped low again, so low she could see individual fighters scrambling between boulders. SEAL teams mark additional targets. She radioed, "I'm not done." Red and blue smoke plumes blossomed across the valley. To anyone else, it looked like chaos. To Delaney, it was a map of survival. She made a second pass. Hydra rockets streaked outward, slamming into ridge lines and enemy bunkers. Explosions rippled like a chain reaction, throwing dirt and fire into the air. On the ground, the pressure lifted. The constant hail of gunfire weakened, then wavered, then broke entirely. The SEALs seized the moment, pushing to better cover, regrouping, pulling the wounded to safety. But the enemy wasn't done. Hundreds of fighters surged from behind a southern ridgeline, a coordinated final push meant to overwhelm the SEALs before air support arrived. Rourke saw them first. Falcon 2, mass movement on the south ridge. They're charging. Delaney didn't hesitate. She banked so hard the G-forces made her vision tunnel. The A-10 dropped toward the valley floor in a roaring dive. She lined up the cannon. The ridgeline filled her HUD. She squeezed the trigger. The GU-8 spat fire and thunder again. Longer this time, angrier, a storm unleashed. The charging force collapsed under the onslaught. Dust rose like smoke over a battlefield that had suddenly shifted from chaos to absolute domination. Silence fell, not the peaceful kind, just the stunned, ringing quiet after too much noise. The remaining enemy fighters broke, fleeing the ridges in panic. The one-stight noose around the SEALs unraveled completely. Falcon 2, Rourke said over the comms, voice thick with raw emotion, "You just saved 381 families tonight." Delaney finally exhaled. She had been holding her breath for minutes without realizing it. Her fuel was dangerously low, her ammo nearly gone. Her muscles ached from the strain of every maneuver, but every SEAL on the ground was alive. Command finally arrived, fighters, gunships, drones, but it hardly mattered now. The battle had been settled before they got there. Delaney climbed out of the valley, engines rumbling like a tired beast. The sun had dipped fully behind the mountains. The sky was purple, quiet, almost peaceful. Rourke's final message came through the radio, softer than before. "Falcon 2, when they write the history of this valley, your name better be the first line." Delaney swallowed hard. "Just doing my job," she replied. But everyone who survived that night knew better. She didn't just do her job. She defied protocol, gravity, and death itself, because to her, no soldier was ever expendable.